Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah, let's dive in.
We have a fascinating set of sources today, really built around Peter Cave's highly acclaimed 2023 book, How to Think Like a Philosopher.
Right. It got a lot of buzz.
It did. And our mission here isn't simply to, summarize the table of contents or anything.
No, definitely not.
We want to perform a true deep dive. Really try to extract the practical, actionable rules for clear thinking and maybe more meaningful living that this book outlines.
Which is such a critical pursuit for our time, I think. And when you look at the source material, critics consistently highlight that this isn't your typical sort of dry academic overview.
Not at all.
Cave approaches philosophy with wit, storytelling, and humor. He's essentially taking this huge, sometimes intimidating field and making it feel accessible.
Yeah.
He makes the case that philosophical thinking is a skill, not just a subject you study.
That's the key differentiator, isn't it? The sources frame this as an immediate shortcut, almost. Instead of needing to read the entire Western canon, Cave invites you, the listener, to engage directly with these great minds, from Socrates and Epictetus right up to Simone de Beauvoir.
A real range.
To rapidly develop what he calls a philosophical mindset. We're looking for that wisdom that sort of cuts through the noise and confusion that seems to define modern life.
And that noise, that constant barrage, is exactly why he insists philosophy is, maybe counterintuitively, the most practical thing of all.
Right. Which sounds odd at first.
It does. But what's fascinating here is how he completely reframes philosophy. He really dismantles that stereotype of it being abstract or, frankly, useless.
Yeah, the dusty books on a shelf image.
Exactly. When information is so cheap and opinions are everywhere, the core task of philosophy, learning how to reason, clearly becomes like essential infrastructure for your mind.
I really like that framing, reasoning as an infrastructure upgrade. Because most people, when they hear philosophy, they think of these impossible, unanswerable questions that have zero bearing on their commute or their job.
All right, what does Plato have to say about my inbox?
Exactly. But Cave is arguing that learning to structure your thoughts is maybe the single best defense against this modern deluge of bias, fear, and distraction.
Precisely. And the critical praise really highlights why this approach works, doesn't it?
It does.
It's lauded for its clarity, its humor. They call it a masterclass in applied philosophy. It seems to manage to inspire both beginners and people who've loved philosophy for ages.
Which is a tricky balance to strike.
It is, and I think it works because Cave is essentially giving you an invitation. He doesn't want you to just admire the ancient thinkers from afar. He wants you to understand how they thought, their methods, and then apply that same kind of reasoning to everything from real-world ethical dilemmas to your own personal emotional challenges.
Okay, so if philosophy is practical and its cruel task is developing good reasoning, where does Cave suggest we actually begin? How do we start? Because here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The first step isn't, memorizing Plato's forms or anything. It's adopting what he calls the art of questioning.
That's the absolute foundation. Philosophy begins with wonder and doubt.
Okay.
Being truly philosophical doesn't mean having all the final answers about truth or happiness or the nature of reality. It means having the courage, really, to ask better, deeper questions about the things we just take for granted every single day.
And we have a great quote from the source material that sort of crystallizes this idea, don't we?
Yeah, which one?
Thinking like a philosopher means daring to ask what others take for granted. I mean, we're constantly building our lives on these inherited assumptions about success or morality or even what makes us happy that we maybe never truly stop and test.
Exactly. Cave makes you stop and actually look at those foundational bricks, as you say.
Yeah.
And the sources give great examples of how practical this questioning is. Think about career success for a moment. We often just assume, right, that a good life requires this relentless climb up a professional ladder. More money, bigger title.
The standard path.
Yeah. But a philosopher, using this art of questioning, might step back and ask, is the purpose of my work actually defined by my title, or is it defined by the meaning I create day to day?
Ah, okay.
That simple pivot, just changing the question, can shift your entire decision-making framework around work.
That makes sense. And it connects immediately to this concept of humility, right? The whole idea of the limits of knowledge.
Definitely.
If we link this to the bigger picture, drawing from Socrates' famous line, I know that I know nothing, Cave really stresses that acknowledging our own ignorance, sometimes profound ignorance, is the actual first step towards wisdom.
It's like the ultimate intellectual honesty, isn't it? In an era where, especially online, discourse often demands absolute certainty.
Right, you have to have a strong take immediately.
Yeah. Admitting doubt feels almost radical. But Cave argues it's a strength. Uncertainty isn't some weakness you need to hide. It's the fertile ground where real learning actually begins. If you think you already know everything, why would you look for better reasons or evidence? Doubt keeps that engine of inquiry running.
It gives you a kind of intellectual elasticity, maybe, flexibility, which feels desperately needed today.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. Elasticity. Okay, so once we've kind of established that foundation, the wonder, the doubt, the questioning, we move a bit deeper into the internal structure of thought itself.
Okay.
And this is where we often hit a common stumbling block. This idea of logic versus feeling, reason versus emotion, we tend to see them as opponents.
Like Spock versus Kirk.
Kind of, yeah. But Cave explores the vital tension between them, and he argues that good thinking, wise thinking, actually demands a deliberate balance.
Okay, this is where we need to slow down a bit and unpack Cave's perspective, because it's easy to just say balance. Does he offer specific tools or ways to think about resolving that conflict when, your head says one thing and your heart says another?
He does, implicitly. He shows that the conflict itself is often maybe an illusion, or at least created by incomplete thinking. He puts it like this. Reason gives you the necessary structure. Think of it as the map, the logic, the rules of how to get from A to B.
Right, the framework.
Exactly. But emotion provides the necessary purpose. That's the compass, the drive, the why behind using the map in the first place.
Okay. I see.
So if you just have structure without purpose, you risk becoming, a cold calculating machine, maybe, just following rules without meaning.
Sure.
But if you only have purpose, raw emotion without structure, you're rudderless, just reacting. Cave argues they're not opposites fighting each other. They're partners in understanding a complex life.
So wisdom needs both.
Wisdom requires integrating them, not trying to eradicate feeling. Feeling is information.
That frames feeling as data, not just noise to be ignored. Okay. So once you begin to sort of balance that internal structure and purpose, then you can move into these bigger, maybe more challenging existential themes he brings in from thinkers like Sartre and Camus.
Yes, freedom and conscious choice.
Right. This is where we address freedom, conscious choice. What does that mean practically?
Yes, and this is where Cave tackles that big, sometimes scary philosophical concept. The idea of living in an absurd world.
Okay, define absurd in this context.
Right. For the listener who hasn't spent a lot of time with existentialism, Cave simplifies the core tension. The universe, fundamentally, seems indifferent to our existence, our desires, our search for meaning.
Doesn't care about us.
Pretty much. Yet we as humans seem hardwired to seek meaning and purpose. That gap, that disconnect between our yearning for meaning and the universe's silence, that's the absurd.
Okay, so the lesson isn't despair, though.
No, quite the opposite. The lesson is not to despair in the face of that indifference, but to recognize the profound freedom that indifference actually gives us.
How so?
Well, thinking philosophically in this view means recognizing this freedom and then choosing to live consciously, deliberately, not just reactively drifting along. The book extracts these powerful lessons about personal freedom, basically arguing that if the world doesn't hand you meaning on a plate,
You have to make it yourself.
you must create it. Every single choice you make, Cave argues, from the most mundane little thing to the most life-altering decision, reflects what you ultimately believe about the purpose of your life.
Wow.
So the core instruction here is pretty simple, but huge. Live deliberately.
That's a profoundly empowering message, isn't it? You're not just a spectator watching your life unfold. You are, in a sense, the author.
Precisely.
So, okay, let's try and tie this all back down to earth. Immediate relevance. What is this whole philosophical toolkit? The doubt, the balance of reason, emotion, the conscious choice. What does it actually mean for the ethical questions and the daily struggles we all face?
Yeah, great question. It means philosophy isn't locked away in academic journals or classrooms. It's about actively living deliberately and applying this kind of robust thinking to real, messy, modern dilemmas.
Okay.
And Cave does this by taking the three major Western ethical frameworks, virtue, duty, and utility, and making them functional tools you can actually use, not just historical ideas.
Right, okay, we probably need to quickly contextualize those three because they often seem to clash. How does Cave make them usable day to day? Let's start with Aristotle's virtue ethics.
Sure. Virtue ethics is all about character. Cave shows that this means asking yourself, what kind of person do I aspire to be? The right action in any situation is the one that a virtuous person, someone courageous, honest, compassionate, etc., would take.
So it's about habit and character over time.
Exactly. It guides long-term habit formation, making sure your choices consistently reflect a stable, admirable character you're building.
Okay. Then you have Kant's duty ethics, which always feels much more rigid to me.
It is more rigid. Duty ethics, or deontology, is about universal rules and obligations. When you're facing an ethical dilemma, you ask, could the principle behind my choice be made into a universal law that everyone must follow, always? And crucially, would I actually want to live in that world?
Right. Like, could lying be a universal law? Probably not sustainable.
Exactly. Cave applies this to things like, say, political truth-telling or rules around data privacy. You act based on a consistent, rational obligation, regardless of the immediate outcome. The intention and the rule matter most.
Okay. And finally, Mill's utility, or utilitarianism, which is purely outcome-focused, right?
That's right. Utility is all about consequences. The morally right action is the one that produces the greatest overall good or happiness or well-being for the greatest number of people involved.
The greatest net positive.
Precisely. Cave demonstrates how this framework applies directly to big policy decisions. Things like allocating scarce medical resources, managing public health crises, or figuring out the societal role of AI. You're constantly weighing the total projected pain versus the total projected pleasure resulting from your decision.
So the real magic here isn't in just picking one favorite framework and sticking to it.
No, not at all.
It's recognizing that you have these three distinct tools, these different lenses, to analyze a complex situation.
That's exactly it. So, for example, when you're discussing the ethics of, say, developing advanced AI, a virtue ethicist might ask, does creating this kind of dependence on technology ultimately make us better, more virtuous people? Or does it erode certain human capacities? A duty ethicist would ask, is the rule we're using for collecting data to train this AI universalizable and fair? Does it treat all individuals with respect as ends in themselves? And a utility ethicist asks the bottom line question, does deploying this AI actually maximize overall global human well-being in the long run, considering all the potential benefits and harms?
Okay, so Cave shows that the real depth comes from running a modern problem through those sometimes competing lenses.
Yes. It gives you a much richer, more fully formed analysis, moving you way beyond just gut reactions or simple pros and cons.
And crucially, it seems like this kind of philosophical thinking naturally expands your circle of concern, doesn't it? It pushes you towards empathy and responsibility for others, maybe even the planet.
It really does. This concept of applied ethical responsibility is what the sources seem to distill into that mandate. Think globally, act ethically.
Yeah.
When you stop taking your own foundational beliefs and cultural norms completely for granted, when you apply that Socratic doubt and reason, you inevitably start to see yourself as interconnected with others in a deeper way.
It breaks down tribalism, maybe.
Potentially, yes. And that blending of classical philosophy, drawing parallels between today's dilemmas and, say, the lessons from Plato's Cave about perception, or Confucius's ideas about social harmony, blending that with insights from modern psychology. That's why critics consistently call this book so accessible and, frankly, entertaining.
Right.
It really bridges that gap between ancient wisdom and concrete contemporary action.
It really sounds like an antidote for that feeling of complexity and maybe intellectual paralysis we sometimes feel.
Yeah.
It gives you, the learner, a pathway through the fog.
I think so. So if we try to synthesize the most important lessons for you, the learner, from this deep dive into Cave's framework, I think we land on three major takeaways.
Okay, let's hear.
First, and maybe most importantly, philosophy is not some exclusive academic reserve. It really is for everyone who possesses curiosity and, maybe just as importantly, the courage to look inward and question.
Right, lowering the barrier to entry. What's second?
Second, the most fundamental skill to cultivate is questioning assumptions. Every belief, every value, every strong opinion you hold needs to face the sometimes uncomfortable test of reason.
And if it can't stand up to that scrutiny,
it's ripe for revision or at least refinement. No belief should be sacred from questioning.
Okay. And the third takeaway.
And finally, you have to maintain a sense of wonder. A philosopher never allows their intellectual curiosity to just atrophy. They never stop asking, what if? And why not?
Keep that engine running.
Exactly. This entire source material really frames philosophical thinking not just as a mental exercise, but as the active, ongoing creation of meaning in what can often feel like an absurd world. It's kind of like an instruction manual for living deliberately.
That's a powerful summary. Okay, so this leaves us, as always, with the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on this week. If the creation of meaning really is a conscious choice you make every single day, as Peter Cave suggests, drawing on those existentialists, then here's the question. What is one deeply held belief or assumption, something you currently take for granted as obviously true, that you are going to deliberately put under the test of reason this week?
That's a tough one.
It is. But finding that assumption and really examining it, that, according to Cave, is the real starting point to truly begin to think like a philosopher.